23. And we're going to be reading verse 1 through verse 11. I'm just waiting for my cue here. Recording is in process.
Actually, I put it on mute so it wouldn't scream at us.
I can start without that. Safe.
I tried that.
Waiting for you too. All right, so I guess we're good to go. All right. And I do appreciate Christian getting here early. You, Bill, setting things up and all he does with the recordings. So it's a real blessing. We're going to remind me at the end to look at the memory verse, Christian, too, because we're going to start emphasizing monthly memory verses. We're doing those in our Sunday school class, but just some specific verses that talk about being strong as men. So we're going to start. We have January's memory verse that we're going to kind of get ahead on a little bit. So we'll go over that at the end, which it's also from the book of Acts. So that'll be pretty easy. All right, let's read verse 1 through verse 11. I didn't count here, but you found one verse per person. So Scott, would you mind to start us there, and then we'll come down, and verse 11 is going to be our key verse.
And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day.
And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth.
Then Paul said to him, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do you sit to try me according to the law, and in violation of the law order me to be struck?
And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest?
Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people.
But when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question.
When he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided.
For the, somebody help me there.
Sadducees.
Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, neither angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both.
And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God.
And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and to take him by force from among them, and to bring him into the castle.
And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. Let's mark what God says to Paul there in verse 11. Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. Now focusing on those words, be of good cheer, be of good cheer. I want to encourage us to be cheerful men and to be cheerful Christians. And I want to start by defining the word cheer. We hear a lot about cheer this time of year. I'm not trying to be a poet there, but cheer this time of year. But be of good cheer. What does that mean to be cheerful? We often just think of that as happiness, right? But I think there's more to the word than just happiness. So I want to give you the definition of that word, kind of the word behind the word. It means to have courage or comfort. Have courage or comfort. It comes from a root word that means to make daring or bold. To have courage or comfort, to make daring or bold. So it's beyond just a feeling of happiness. It's this idea of being courageous in your heart and spirit. Many times in the Old Testament, God would challenge different ones, and they would be strengthened by those words. Be of good courage. I think about Joshua over and over again. Be of good courage, Joshua, as he was stepping up to what God had called him to do. So there is a sense of happiness in this, but I think beyond that, there's a sense of courage that God wants us to have as men. Now, I want to look at this passage here and just try to answer a couple of questions about what it means to be of good cheer. The first thing is, why did Paul need to be cheered up? And we're going to consider the context. In verse 11, it says, and the night following the Lord stood by him. So let's talk about what happens before God shows up and speaks to Paul. What has happened before this that would maybe pull on Paul's spirit a little bit and had brought him to this place where he needed God to cheer him up and to give him the courage and the comfort that was necessary really to move on and do what he needed to do. I guess even going beyond this passage, let's zoom out a little bit more than just chapter 23 and think about where is Paul at in his life at this point in Acts 23. Does anybody know what's as far as, I mean, he's been converted, right? We know he's a saved man. After his conversion, he goes on a couple missionary journeys, right, with Barnabas and then with Silas. So those things are completed. What city is he in right now? Start there.
Jerusalem.
He's in Jerusalem. Remember how God put in him this great desire to return to Jerusalem. Time and time again, different ones had tried to talk him out of going, but he was just determined in his heart and mind that he was going to go back to Jerusalem. So he returns to Jerusalem. He's in the temple. What happens in the temple? Anybody remember?
You got a whole bunch of people calling him out, accusing him of certain things.
Yes.
And then they have beaten him.
Yeah, so he's beaten. He's in the temple. He's trying to worship and serve God. And so then he's placed in prison. And now he's at a point where he's giving his defense for what he's done, who he is. In chapter 23, when it says he's before the council, who or what is this council? The Sanhedrin. From my understanding of Sanhedrin, there were 71 members. I don't know why that magical number is 71, but they're different elders, scribes, the high priestly family. Who was in charge? Who was the president of this council? Very powerful council. The high priest himself was in charge. This council was so powerful, they had been given the authority that they could actually they could pass judgment. They could even sentence ones to death if need be. So this is a very powerful group of people that Paul is standing before, trying to give his defense. So let's figure out then what's happening in chapter 23 that would really cause Paul to need God to cheer him up, and we'll try to identify with things that happen in our lives that would maybe pull our spirit down, that would cause us to need God to encourage us and cheer us up. All right, so verse 1, he's standing before the council and he starts to give his defense, but he doesn't get very far. Notice the words in verse 1, men and brethren, I've lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And there's a lot in that. That was actually my meditation not long ago, just that phrase, I've lived in all good conscience before God. Can we say that with what we're doing, with what we're saying, with our priorities? Are we living in good conscience before God? That is most important, that we can go to sleep at night and know I've done what God has told me to do today. Paul said, I've had that good conscience before God. Now, what was the response to Paul's opening remarks there in verse 1? What happens now in verse 2?
Sorry, got the high priest Ananias sending a command to smite him in the mouth.
Yeah, so it didn't go over well, right? I mean, that wasn't exactly the response that Paul was hoping for. And it, it just stood out as we were reading through this, and it wasn't necessarily my notes, but we can learn from Paul here. We can learn from Ananias. What might we learn from Ananias in verse 2? Think about who he is. I mean, this guy is supposed to be the religious, spiritual leader of the nation. The lot of hypocrisy, right? And we're going to come down to the white walls. Anything else? I think there's a great lack of wisdom here. That he has no idea who Paul is, how God is using Paul. He's completely oblivious to this, and he's so biased by his own thinking, what others are telling him, that he is completely blinded to what the Lord's doing through this man. And he responds here in verse 2, emotionally in anger, and he tells the person next to him, whether it be this is a soldier or whoever it is, to smite Paul in the mouth. And how you ever been hit in the mouth before? Ever had that's not a good experience. I got braces toward the end of my high school time, and I played basketball. I remember just getting drilled in the mouth. It seemed like nonstop, and just your mouth is always bleeding from the braces and getting hit. But he's hit here. When you look at the word smite, and again, I enjoy looking up words, and you could look this one up, but it's the idea of not being hit once, but repeatedly. There's a different word for a single blow as opposed to a repeated blow. So more than likely he's been hit several times, maybe even hit with a stick or something along those lines. But that had been painful, and that had to have been very, very upsetting for Paul when he's trying to just give his defense, and he really doesn't get much of it out. Now let's look at Paul's response, and this has been said many times, but you cannot control the actions of others, right? You can't control what the Ananias do in your life. People that should know better, people that should be, religious, spiritual people, sometimes act in very sinful, foolish ways. You can't control Ananias, but you can control you. You can control how you respond to what others are doing. And how did Paul respond in verse 3?
Tells him what God's going to do in response to his anger.
Yeah. He says, God's going to smite you, thou whited wall. What does that mean, whited wall? You may have a thought of some of the things that Jesus said in the book of Matthew when you think of a whited wall.
Maybe you appear to people like a good person, and you do good things and make good laws, but in your heart you're lost and wicked.
Yeah. It's a reference, Christ dealing with really the same group of people here, the Pharisees. He called them whited walls. There was a image of the tombs there, and they would whitewash the outside of the tombs or sepulchers. And so really they look beautiful to the eye, but inside, Christ said, you're full of dead men's bones. So outwardly you look good, but inwardly you're filled with all kinds of unrighteousness. So he's referencing what Christ had called this same group of people. And so he says, God's going to smite thee. And this actually was a prophecy that would come to pass, that Ananias and his brother, he had a brother named Hezekiah, they were actually slain by a group of men later on that kind of took over the city. So his prophecy came true. He says, you sit to judge me after the law and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law. I just looked this up. Leviticus 19:35, I believe, is the passage he is referencing when he talks about the importance of giving the right type of judgment. And you said, Ananias, you're not following scripture. Now, in verse 4, Paul is rebuked by somebody else. He's rebuked the priest, the high priest. Now he's going to be rebuked by somebody else for doing that. In verse 4, they that stood by said, revilest thou God's high priest? And then in verse 5, Paul said, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. Paul was a man of the book. He wanted to live his life by scripture. He wanted to make sure that his responses were biblical. Now, let me ask you a question here, and I don't know if there'll be some discussion or maybe even debate on this, but was Paul right or wrong in the way he responded to what Ananias had told the soldier to do to Paul? Was Paul's response right or wrong?
Well, he didn't quite say that he's going to do something to you, which I would think would be a natural response in anger. It's like, I'm coming after you.
Right, you hit me,
I'll hit you in the parking lot.
Yeah.
He says kind of what God's going to do to him. So I don't know that that's right, but it's maybe more right than what Ananias' response was, I suppose.
Okay. And anybody else, was he right in his response to Ananias, or did he kind of step over the line there in verse number 3?
He was truthful, and the truth hurts.
All right, so he did tell him the truth that God was going to judge him, that he was a hypocrite, he was a white wall. What about his statement there in verse 5? Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people.
Well, he also says, I didn't know that you were the high priest.
Which is sad, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's sad that, and I don't know how they dressed, or, if there was, if there was some way to distinguish the high priest from the others, but Paul said, I didn't even know who you were. That's sad, that the leader should stand out, but he said, you're acting like somebody that has no control of themselves or their emotions.
He could have meant that he didn't know because of his behavior.
Right,
Maybe they would have clothed him distinguished.
right,
I don't know.
right. It's a little hard to tell, isn't it? I think Paul's heart is right in verse 5. Maybe his anger did get the best of him in verse 3. I don't know. Is it righteous indignation? It's a little hard to tell. But he in verse 5 is very clear that had I known he was the ruler, I maybe would have responded differently than I did. And if I did step over the line, I think Paul's saying, I apologize for that. I want to make that right. He is the high priest. I don't respect him as a person because of the way he's responding, his hypocrisy, his anger, but I'm going to respect his position. And that's still true even today. So there's certain people that we don't respect the character of the person, but the position they hold is respectful.
It's funny, they said to Jesus the same thing when Jesus spoke.
Yeah.
Like, don't you know this is
Right.
of people that were of the religious circle.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Jesus knew who they were.
Yeah.
But they would say the same thing, like, hey, let me remind you who you're talking to.
Yep. Yeah, so now let's tie that into verse 11, and we're going to come back and get verse 6 to 10. So why did Paul need cheered up? Well, I'm going to put this down, and I put possible because I don't know this definitely, but it's possible he felt disappointed, and maybe even disappointed in himself that he had given in to some emotions. He had responded there in verse 3 with some anger. Again, I don't know this for sure, but I know that oftentimes the enemy will make us feel guilty about our responses in a given situation. So now he's in the castle and he's thinking about this, and maybe he's just, man, I disappointed God, or I disappointed myself. Why did I respond that way? I should have known he's the high priest. I shouldn't have said what I said. I should have just taken it. Should have turned the other cheek. Should have just been the Christian in that moment. But it's hard when you're getting hit to not want to respond, whether physically or verbally, and defend yourself and say what you feel. What's that?
At least you didn't
At least didn't hit him back, right? But it's possible he's feeling disappointed. Scott.
There's also, Paul seems to be in some of these situations very perceptive of what's going on. It's not like I'm imagining a monologue past him, and he's looking for that opportunity to display. He was a Pharisee, to display his knowledge of the word and present that to give some credibility. Some in the audience probably would look at it and say, oh, yes, he knows his word. And then later on, he's like looking around, it's like, how can I divide these guys? He's doing Pharisees.
Yeah, he's going to exercise that perception in verse 6. But again, maybe I'm wrong, and Paul will set us straight at some point. But it's possible he needed cheered up because he's feeling disappointed with himself that man, I just didn't respond the way I should have. And any of us, he's about to give this discourse and this defense, and he doesn't even get but a few words into it, and things don't go as planned. So, we all, I think, disappoint ourselves at different times, and we feel like I could have done better in that situation. I should have been more in control. At home, something doesn't go the way it's supposed to go, and we respond in anger or frustration and kind of fly off the handle. And later, at some point, we look back and think, why did I do that? I should have been in more control than I was. So I think we can identify with the disappointment maybe that Paul is feeling here, and that's why he needs cheered up.
Maybe under persecution, because he was being judged or persecuted, it seems like maybe for doing good, being righteous.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little more about that, how that can cause us to just feel discouraged after we've been persecuted. Yeah.
Well, and he says, like, his first comment is like, I'm trying to do the right thing. I think I've lived.
Yeah.
And I think that hurts more
Yeah.
as a Christian to feel like you've been doing well in relation to the people around you, especially. And then just a short blip of sin around you from someone who's maybe a believer, non-believer, high priest, who knows what, can bring out that anger in you so quickly. And I'm sure that adds the disappointment.
Yeah.
So there would also be that you would have been feeling at least some measure of, even if you've got God's power in you, there's some intimidation as a man who's going to be outnumbered that much and knowing the power that they've got and hold against you. So
71-1,
I would need some cheering.
Yeah. So there's a number of things I think going on here, and we all look back and think, man, I should in the moment I should have responded differently than I did. Whether that be at work, whether that be at home, whether that just be in your own, we all disappoint God and disappoint ourselves, and so we need cheered up, because the devil can jump in there in that moment, and he can just add fuel to the fire. And just a quick illustration. No one move on here to this next, but I share with a few of you guys, and I just blew it this week with my family, which I didn't grow up with Christmas like a lot of people grew up with Christmas. So I've learned some of the traditions, and we do special things with our family. And so we had this plan to surprise our kids with this gift, and had it all figured out, and got them this a big ping pong table we're finishing our basement. So this will be nice, good Christmas gift. And so we had it all planned out how we're gonna get it there, we're gonna hide it, and I was supposed to lock the shed and not throw away the key, but hide the key, because he's the culprit. If there's something hidden, he is gonna figure out what it is. It's just the way it is. And I had the thought of, well, I'll do it tonight. I was kind of in a hurry. And sure enough, he goes in the building trying to get his bike out and his sister's bike out. Come in his defense, he is a very sensitive conscious. So he comes up and knocks on our door, and he's like, I think I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. So, and it was, and I said, don't feel bad. It was me. I didn't do my part. I was supposed to lock. And you feel like a horrible dad. I ruined Christmas. They know what the gift is and all of this. But anyways, the devil gets in there. It can really add fuel to that. And sometimes it was unintentional. It's just, but that we need encouraged and cheered up after we make mistakes and we have failures and disappointments. So
Detail us.
She was with him supposedly. Addie said, just act surprised, and because she knew. He's like, I can't do that. I think exchange. That's right. That really surprised him.
That's not weird. That's for a missionary.
Yeah. I think the most disappointing was Sheila. But so, anyways,
all those describe hurt. So he was probably just hurt.
I think so too. Yep. I think he's hurt. physically, and I think beyond that, I think he's hurt, internally. All right, so then letter B, another possibility, and we're not trying to read the text, but we're just trying to get a feel for Paul we're trying to make this personal. When it says be of good cheer, Paul, we want to put our names in there, be of good cheer, Nathan, be of good cheer, Larry. This passage is written not just about Paul, it's written about us. And so why does he need cheered up? Maybe he's feeling disappointed. Now let's look at verse 6 to 10 and see, maybe there's another reason here why he is needing to be cheered up. So he does have perception, and we need perception in verse 6 there to understand the situation. And maybe he doesn't have that perception a little earlier, but God now is giving him that perception. And he sees that in this council, there are some Sadducees and Pharisees, and they're different in their beliefs. My wife's grandfather would always say the Sadducees are sad because because they don't believe in the resurrection. Right?
Oh, I was going to use that.
Was that your line too? Okay. Sorry, I blew it. But Pharisees did believe in the resurrection and other spiritual things. Sadducees, basically, if we can't see it, we don't believe it. That was kind of their thinking. So if it's an angel or a spirit or resurrection, that doesn't fit. They didn't operate in faith. So he says, I am a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I'm called in question. Verse 7, when he said this, now there's a dissension. Now there's a divide in this council. The multitude is divided. Verse 8, again, Sadducees say there's no resurrection. Verse 9, there arose a great cry. So things are starting to get out of control in this council. Scribes over the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, we find no evil in this man, but if the spirit or an angel hath spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And verse 10, when there arose a great dissension. So it moves from dissension in verse 10 to great dissension. That's often what happens. A small disagreement now is turning into a big disagreement. And wise leaders diffuse situations, but this one is just getting out of hand. In so much that the chief captain, his name is Lysias, over in chapter 24, verse 7, Chief Captain Lysias. This wasn't the first time that he had stepped in and rescued Paul. He had already done this once in the temple. And it says he was fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces. That word means to dismember, like, two kids pulling on a baby doll and the arm snaps off. I mean, that's kind of the idea. They're pulling on Paul. The Sadducees are saying one thing, the Pharisees are saying something else. I mean, this council is out of control.
He's chained up, right?
I don't know. I mean, you'd think he's still a soldier, so I don't know. Or I'm sorry, not a soldier, a prisoner. So I'm not exactly sure on that. But they're pulling on him, and so Lysias commands soldiers to go down and take him by force for a moment and bring him into the castle. So obviously the Romans were watching this council and keeping an eye on things, and it's getting out of control. I think that's sad, and just some of these thoughts are hitting me for studying this. But if the Sanhedrin represents Christianity, which I think we all agree that a lot of these men were not saved, most of them were not. Probably even Ananias was not saved. But if the Romans are the world and the Christians are Sanhedrin, I think it's sad if the world looking on says that is not the way Christians should be acting. What a poor testimony this was for these unsaved Romans to see the Jews acting like this, totally out of control. And what a shame that the world watching us says that is not the way a Christian should be acting.
That's what I started saying. The non-saved people, they look at a Christian, and if you, of course, they're always looking at you, real fine tooth and comb.
Yeah.
Watching what you do and what you say, and if you do something, they say that's the way a Christian is. I don't want to be one.
Right. Yeah.
So I think as Christians, we do hurt a lot of people in our reactions.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Yeah, Lysias, I don't know if there's any record of him ever getting saved, but this wouldn't have done much to help in that situation. But Lysias steps in and delivers him, and that's a great example of God. God knows how much we can handle, and he will send us people to step in and help deliver us from situations that we find ourselves in. But I want to put this down as letter B, that it's possible that Paul felt depleted by the situation that he's just went through. Disappointed maybe in himself and his reaction earlier, but now just depleted. Just the emotion, the crying, the yelling, the fighting, all of that. He physically has been hit and that he's been pulled on. I mean, you just think about how worn out and depleted he is after going through this situation. Now, physically, we may not go through something just like this, but there's times where we feel like I'm being pulled in pieces. You've got this pulling on you at work, this at home, and in your personal life, you got all this stuff just like, I can't hold it together. I'm being pulled in so many directions. And thankfully God delivers us out of that. But there's a weariness that comes after we've gone through an emotional experience like this. Anytime there's dissension, anytime there's division, that's hard. I remember some of the meetings that we were in, church we were involved in years ago. And there were just some problems. There was a man, really a Diotrephes from 3rd John, a man that was trying to take over the church, and it was a bad situation. And the business meetings, people yelling, people running out, and I'm a teenager, like, this is not the way it's supposed to work. And you get done with a meeting like that, you're just drained, just the emotional fatigue. Sometimes you go to a funeral, you feel this too. You just, I mean, how can a funeral wear you out? But just the emotions of it, you're just totally drained after something like that. And I can imagine how Paul is just totally depleted, exhausted after going through what he's just experienced here. And so he's sitting in the castle and, wondering what's next, just kind of at the end of his rope. And let's look at question 2. We got to hurry along here before we get to that.
I wonder if 2 Corinthians 4 and 8 and 9 describe this account.
What are those? Real quick.
We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed.
Maybe he penned those, around the same experience. I'm not exactly sure, but this was a hard time. This was a low point for Paul. And we think of Paul often just being so courageous and just an overcomer, but he's having a tough time. So now let's look at number 2 and answer this question. How did God cheer up Paul? We understand some of why, because of the situation and some of the struggles he's just come out of. So we understand why he's down, why he's discouraged. But how does God cheer him up, and how does God cheer us up? Look at verse 11. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. How does God cheer up discouraged believers?
Practice what you preach.
Okay, good. That's good, right?
Reassurance.
Reassurance, good.
His presence, just that he stood by him. He's there.
Yep. So that's the first blank, is his presence. God stood by him.
So is he just saying like there's going to be a tomorrow? Like you're going to have to see him today?
Yep. Yeah. I'll come to that second part here in just a moment, of the promise that he makes. But yeah, he just shows up. Aren't you thankful God shows up when you need it most? Sometimes he shows up through others like Lysias that steps in, and we know that God used this person. Sometimes God just shows up himself. And what a blessing that must have been in that prison cell, in that castle, to know that the Lord's presence is with him. Turn quickly to 2 Timothy 4. And verse 16. Yeah, he must have felt like guys had outnumbered, 71-1. They didn't listen. I kind of got caught up in it. These are supposed to be the religious leaders. What kind of hope does our nation even have? He's just down. And yet, here in 2 Timothy 4, verse 16 and 17, we find the Lord did this several times for Paul. At my first answer, no man stood with me, but all men forsook me. I pray God that it may not be laid to their charge. Notwithstanding, the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, that by me the preaching might be fully known, and that all the Gentiles might hear. And I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion. So nobody was standing with him, but he said, God stood with me. What a blessing to know that the Lord, he stands with us. He stands by us in those moments when we feel incapable, when we feel down, and we feel like we're alone, we're discouraged. God stands with us and helps us. I've shared this before. It's a really neat illustration of this truth. Jackie Robertson, many of you know, he was the first Black professional baseball player. And as a result, trying to break that color barrier, he would be mocked and ridiculed at different stadiums he would go to. And he was in his home stadium in Brooklyn and played second base, committed an error, and the fans were just jeering him. The shortstop, Pee Wee Reese, came over from his position, stood next to Jackie Robinson, put his arm around him, and faced the crowds. And they said the crowds just went silent when they saw that act. And later on, Jackie Robinson said that arm around his shoulder saved his career because he stood next to him. And you think about the times when God stands next to us, and we know God's always with us. He never leaves us nor forsakes us. But there's times where it's like you just really sense God's presence is with me right now, encouraging me, giving me the words to say, giving me the ability in this moment. God's presence, just being with us, his abiding presence is something that will cheer us up like nothing else. And there's so many biblical examples of different ones that said, oh, God, I can't do this. And God's answer was, I'll be with you. I'll be with you. And that's enough, my presence.
You kind of almost feel one with that person. I think whenever you're kind of in that moment alone and someone kind of puts their arm around you, you almost feel like you're just one. And for that to be how God treated Paul had to have been an incredible feeling.
And even the fact that, again, I don't know, I can't prove this from the text, but let's say Paul was wrong in his response. He got angry. The fact that the Lord said, I understand, Paul. I know. We all disappoint ourselves. We all get caught up. It's okay. I'm not going to forsake you. I'm here with you. And what a blessing, God's grace and long suffering in our lives. So God's presence, and then the promise that Nick mentioned there was a promise. What is the promise? Be of good cheer, Paul. And then what's the promise he gives him?
You're going to Rome.
Yeah, you're going to Rome. You're not going to die in Jerusalem. You're going to Rome. So I think it's encouraging that God says, I know what you've done already, as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem. Sometimes we do things and we think, does anybody even know? Does anybody even notice? Does God even notice the things I'm trying to do for him? And God says, Paul, I know. The high priest may not understand. The council may not care, but I see what you're doing. It does matter. And what you've done in Jerusalem, you're going to do in Rome. I have big plans ahead for you. It's not over. You're not finished. And it reminds you of Elijah. And I think we went there last week right here with Elijah and his discouragement. He felt like it was over too. But God appeared to him and said, no, there's still work to be done. You got to anoint this guy and you got to give this guy this message. And there's still a work to be done. So don't believe the lies of the devil that God's finished with you. This is the end. God has plans for us, great plans. He wants to use us in a mighty way. And he gave him that promise of what was to come. And that really encouraged him. That really cheered him up. So put your name in verse 11 and hear the voice of God. Our wives need us to be cheerful men. That does involve happiness. It's okay to be happy. We do. There's a lot of cares, and as you get older, kids are just carefree. As you get older, there's a lot of burdens, right? There's a lot of hard things in life, but we can't let those things rob us of our joy that God wants us to have. Your wife needs you to be a cheerful person, not just on the good days, but even on the bad days. Your kids need you to be a cheerful dad. They need to know that dad's got the joy of the Lord. People in the church and the ministries you're involved in, fellow believers at your workplace, people need to know this person has the joy of the Lord. And they need to know that you're courageous. They need to see in you that daring spirit, that bold spirit. I try to be careful what I say to my kids about the current culture, and try not to be too down on things, because they're going to grow up in this world, and they need to know that, yeah, things are bad, but God's in control, and God's still on the throne, and he's working, and miracles can happen. They need to sense that positivity. God's a positive God. Many people would say, this is a hopeless situation. The high priest is probably not even saved. He doesn't even recognize what God's doing. Many people would say it's over, but God says, no, I'm still going to use you, Paul. I have a great work for you to do. So we need to be positive, cheerful men, courageous men. And I think this too, that, when he says be of good cheer, Paul, he's saying, Paul, you have to make a choice. I'm gonna be here. You've got my promise, you got my presence, but you have to make a choice. And I want to finish with this. I was reading some the life of Joseph. Jackson and I have been studying Joseph, and when his father Jacob heard that Joseph he thought had been killed, I don't know if you remember that his kids try to comfort him, and the Bible says that he refused to be comforted. So you have to make a choice to allow others to comfort you and encourage you. That's a choice. So when he says, Paul, be of good cheer, he's saying you got to make this choice. You can stay down the dumps and you can have your pity party and you can continue in this, or you can listen to what I'm telling you and you can allow me to lift your spirit and you can move forward. So you have a choice to make, all of us. You're going to live today discouraged, defeated, depleted, whatever the word is there, or you can say, okay, God, I know what happened the night before, but this is a new day. Your presence is with me. I have your promise, and I'm going to be of good cheer. It's a choice you make. And I pray that we all make that choice. Any comments? And then we're going to look at our memory verse or questions.
Well, you were saying before that it's a lie, that I think that's something Satan feeds you, is that your life's over.
Yeah.
The mistake you made is too big. The hurt you feel won't go away.
Right.
And this is it. This is all that there is. And in the eyes of the world, that can really be daunting and an overcoming emotional feeling.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
But you need to be encouraged and know that God has a plan for you. There's more to come.
Yeah.
No matter what the circumstances you're facing.
Yeah.
And that is an encouragement. If you've ever made a mistake or felt like you've let someone down, for them to come to you and say, it's okay, I have a big plan for you, like you were saying, that really would encourage you.
Yes. Yeah, just the Lord's tenderness, how he deals with Paul is really a blessing. And he's so good with all of us. Anybody else?
Yeah. I think it's humbling, but we've had 7 kids and some of our later ones, and we're still trying to hold the line and finish strong and everything. And I can be intense on wanting to hold standards and stuff like that. Hey, you've got to do this, not yelling but you can see intenseness there.
Yeah.
One of my boys said, I don't respond well to that. Yeah. That for me, it just broke my heart, that hearing that, but it's just healing your mind because God teaches you. And it's just that's wow, I just needed, and it's just, and he's a different person. So I just need to approach that in a different way, a much more tender. And it's ever since that time, it's just, it is much more responsive to, I'm saying the same things, but I'm saying it in a different way. But that's, that cheerfulness that you said, God, you need to be cheerful to wife, kids, everybody around you, not just work or outside situations.
I think how God treats his children, teaches us much about how we should treat our children. And he could have blasted Paul for, many things, but he accomplished the same thing. But it was the tenderness that's important.
I think as we get older, our children will say things that if we were raising them as they were growing up, we could say, well, we could have done that a little different, or think we did a good job in that area. But I think we all, as we get older and our children get older, we can make different decisions as we went along. But like you said, when they do praise you, Dad taught me that, or Mom taught me that, and that's why, like if their wives would say, why do you do that, or why do you think that way? And so, well, that's what Mom and Dad did. There's a song that says, this boy, they stopped at McDonald's and he spilled his fries and said something he shouldn't. And his dad said, why do you say that? He said, I want to be like you, Dad. And then at the end, the boy prayed and he said, where did you learn to pray like that? He said, I've been watching you, Dad.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Christian, let's look at that verse. And Christian pointed out something too, that later on, and we didn't locate the exact passage, but later on when Paul's on the ship, he's headed to Rome where God said he was going to go. He says those exact words, be of good cheer, to the rest of the individuals on the ship. So it's almost like the cheer that God had given to him, he's now spreading that to others. So it's important for you to be a good cheer because people around you, they need that cheer as well. But let's look at that verse. Was there any specific reason, Christian, that led you to that verse, or just thought this could be a real help to us as men?
Yeah, I think it could be a real help to us as men, but I'm not trying to cheat or anything, but this was one of the first verses I memorized.
Okay.
And it was a challenge to me just because it was so long. So
right.
I kind of wanted to just share that with all of you. And,
yeah. Well, if you're picking the verses, you might as well pick ones you already know. So.
right. But I certainly don't have to be the only one who picks verses.
Thanks for picking my song.
No, this is a great verse, isn't it? So why don't we let's read it. Let's say the reference, then the verse, and the reference, and this will be our January verse. So we're just getting a little bit head start. And while I'm thinking of it, we will not have studied next week unless we can spend Christmas morning together here. And we won't have the following week either. That's New Year's Day.
We want to see that same point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So two weeks off from men's study because of the way it falls with the holidays. But then we'll pick it up in January. We'll get back to it and we'll start working on this verse more. But let's read the reference, first reference. Ready? Acts 20:24. But none of these things would be, neither count I my life dear in myself, so that I might finish my course with joy in the ministry which I received from the Lord Jesus to testify the gospel of the grace of God. Acts 20:24. Yeah, so let's keep at that. And I'm thankful that Christian brought this out because as we started to study, I had intentions to do Bible memory, but I just hadn't got to it. So this is going to be a good emphasis for us to hide these scriptures in our heart. All right, let's close in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we are just blessed to have this time to gather around the table here and open up the Word of God. Lord, thank you for the emphasis. I know that there's a lot of different ways we could go with this men's study and different things that other churches do, but I appreciate just the focus on prayer, the focus on the lesson and the discussion, and now the focus on Bible memory. Lord, these are the things that we need most, and we're thankful for, and we appreciate what we learned today, what we've been reminded of. Lord, may we make the choice. Sometimes it's just easier to hold on to that bad spirit, to just kind of wallow in misery and make everybody miserable around us because things didn't go as planned. I've been also just reminded studying some things in the book of Esther, and Haman is such a poor example to us, but he allowed his situation to control his spirit. And if things were going well, he was happy. If things were going poorly, he was upset. Lord, may we just rise above our circumstances and live a consistent, cheerful, courageous life, knowing who you are. Our courage is not in us, but it's the fact that you're standing with us. And Lord, we know that with God, all things are possible. Lord, I'm thankful for the appearance that you had to Joshua, Lord, as that soldier, the captain of the Lord's host, and how that helped him to embrace what was ahead of him. And Lord, just be near to us today. Help us to claim your promises. And Lord, know that you have a great future ahead for us. And that future, Lord, is beyond what the situation around us seems to indicate. As we look at a world filled with sin and despair, Lord, you're still a great God, and you can still do a great work. And I pray that we would be that shining light in our neighborhoods and communities and homes. And Lord, may we just go home determined to have a great day. Lord, just being a blessing and a servant, helping our family, loving our kids, doing what we can, Lord, just to cheer up those around us as well. Thank you for these men. Thank you for their faithfulness on a rainy, dark Saturday morning, being faithful to this study. I appreciate that. And we ask your blessings upon the rest of this day and the Lord's Day tomorrow. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, guys.